It's a pleasure to have you. Well, and talking on the Perfect Gentleman magazine, it's lovely to have you with us. So tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you do.
Okay, I'm a senior fellow at Cass Business School. I lecture on various postgraduate modules there, mostly based around investment. I've formerly been a corporate lawyer in the City of London and then an investment banker. And I've also spent time in investment management, most notably with the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. And I've been writing books on a variety of subjects for some years now. I've written, I think, about 14 books, mostly on finance and investment and economics, but more recently venturing into fiction, firstly with my Map and Lucia books, which of course are a continuation of the originals by E.F. Benson, and then most recently into the world of detection fiction, but very heavily influenced by the golden age of writing before the Second World War.
Oh, fabulous. So interesting transition that from sort of corporate lawyer, investment banker to lecturer, writer. Well, how did that come about? Why did you sort of transition out of
I think the
standard life?
Yeah, I think the initial transition from a lawyer was simply I just made a bad career choice. I won my mooting competition. That will mean something to people who've read law. I won my mooting competition at university both my last 2 years, and I should really have gone to the bar, but for a variety of reasons I didn't. I became a solicitor. And in those days, the distinction between the two branches of the profession was much more pronounced. You were actually quite limited in what you could do as a solicitor. And I think, wanted to be an advocate. So I suspect had I gone to the bar, I might still have been a barrister today, but I didn't. So instead I went off and did an MBA, which is my life come full circle. So I now lecture on MBA courses, and I use that really as a springboard. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, to be honest, and I drifted first into working for a family office and then for an investment bank doing corporate finance, M&A type transactions.
And then how did the writing come about?
The writing was really quite serendipitous. I was invited some time ago to give a talk at the National Association of Pension Funds conference in Edinburgh. And I happened to be fairly provocative, which I tend to be when I'm speaking at these occasions, and that got reported in the Financial Times. And the next thing I knew, I had a phone call from Wiley, the big financial publisher, saying we'd like you to write a book for us, which I did because I'd always wanted to write a book. But it took me some time to make the transition to fiction, and my only regret, to be honest, is that I didn't start a lot earlier, because I now realise that sort of writing is probably the one thing that is closest to what I want to do.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the non-fiction writing first and lecturing. So why do you like lecturing? Let's.
I love lecturing because I feel I'm making a difference. I think I'm probably genuinely quite a good communicator, and I particularly like lecturing on the MBA course because it's a course that's typically taken by people who are trying to change their lives in some way. They're investing a lot of time and a lot of money in that, and I just find it very rewarding, not in a financial sense, but in an emotional sense. I find it rewarding to be part of helping people change their lives.
And then so you've written mostly non-fiction at the moment? Mostly
non-fiction, yes. It's a combination of MBA type textbooks such as private equity and multi-asset class investing and investment strategy. And my particular sort of pet little hobby horse is trying to explain complicated concepts to people who don't have any real specialist education in that area. So that is books like No Fear Finance, which really tries to explain finance to people who don't have a mathematical background.
Which is most people, I think.
It's most people, and it's surprisingly difficult. It's without doubt the most difficult book I ever wrote. It's extremely difficult trying to explain a concept like risk or the time value of money to people who are not arithmetically minded.
Yeah, and I think what's the interesting thing about that is it's a great book, but what's interesting is that so many people have no clue about macro level finance, even and then micro level finance, or any kind of education about what money is at the end of the day and how money flows around the world.
That's right. I mean, I strongly believe that finance should be a compulsory sixth form subject in schools, because I do find it tragic that people go out into the world expected to make all sorts of complicated financial decisions which will have a big impact on their lives, things to do with pensions and mortgages and so forth, without any real idea of the issues behind the decisions they're making.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that's one of the interesting. I think our education system is somewhat not fit for purpose anymore.
I think that's right. I think where it fails is in teaching essential life skills.
Yeah.
And finance clearly is an essential life skill. It's almost impossible these days to go through life without understanding finance.
No, I think that's very true. I think one of the things that I realised as I left school, wasn't particularly good at school, but I left school, was that all the things that I was taught at school, I had some lovely subjects, but the practicalities of most of them were nil, really.
Yes, that's right.
Sort of hit the real world and, okay, well, what happens there? And
Yeah.
I think that's true of a lot of education. You get kind of, it's a lot of theory and a lot of nice stuff, but practical stuff is severely lacking.
And it's something you really notice when you go to America, for example, that the base level of knowledge of things like investment and finance, which ordinary people have, the person in the street has, is distinctly higher than it is in the UK.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, it reminds me of that sort of thing we talk about a lot at The Perfect Gentleman, is that 200, 300 years ago, you were expected to be a polymath. You were expected
Yes.
to be able to talk about philosophy and science and finance and write poetry and fence and
Yes.
all that kind of stuff. And now that's all gone. You have to be a specialist and not a generalist.
It's the cult of the specialist, and it's another reason why I left the law, actually. I found myself being squeezed into an ever-narrowing area of practice, and it really wasn't what I wanted to do. I mean, in fairness, of course, the sum total of knowledge is considerably greater today than it was a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
But I think your point is still valid. I do think it's tragic that we're not expected to be renaissance anymore.
No, we're not, and that is quite sad. I think it's a bit of a sad thing for us. So the non-fiction is heavily finance based, and it's very good, and some of it's quite provocative. Mm-hmm. Do you enjoy being provocative, or is that kind of just?
It's not that I enjoy being provocative per se. I think I'm just a fully paid up member of the awkward squad. I think if I see that something I think people have got wrong, I do feel a sort of duty to point it out. And anybody who's been to any of my lectures will know that I think there's quite a lot wrong with modern financial theory, and that's what quite a lot of my books are about.
Well, yeah, this is it's very true as well. But I agree with that. So I'm going to sort of jump backwards. Were you an awkward young man, an awkward child?
I think I was an unusual child, if only that I grew up in a house without television, so I was a voracious reader from a very early age, and I certainly always preferred the company of books to the company of other people. So I would typically sort of start reading a book when I got up in the morning and stop when I went to bed, and my long-suffering mother used to have to take me to the public library, usually every other day during the school holidays, because I did also develop a knack of reading very quickly. So I was just trying to calculate the other day how many books I must have read in my life, and it sounds a ridiculous number, but it's probably 10,000 or more.
It's very feasible. I mean, I'm an avid reader and a very fast reader too. I mean, if I have time, I can do a book a day quite merrily and quite happily.
Yes.
And on holidays, I'm known for that. I'll take 6 or 7 books on a week-long trip, and I'll get through all of them. And much to the chagrin of my wife and family when I was growing up as well. But yes, it's a feasible thing, and I think it's very interesting. I think we don't read enough as a culture now as well. But that's it.
And I really don't understand how people really learn things, how they acquire knowledge without reading books, because so much of it just gets squirreled away in some little corner of the subconscious, and it sort of comes back to you when you need it.
Yeah, and the connections are made.
Yes, and it's making the connections, as you say, that is the important thing.
Oh, okay. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in North London.
Excellent. So a Londoner born and bred?
A Londoner born and bred.
One of the rare ones.
Yes, although I went to school mostly in Norfolk.
Okay.
And my parents also had a holiday home in Norfolk, so in my younger days, I was at least a pseudo Norfolk person as well.
Okay,
but
so-
I'm essentially a Londoner.
Yeah, no, that's a good. As a born and bred Londoner, I appreciate that as well. That's really cool. I like that very much. I didn't realise you were born and bred Londoner.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. hence the book we'll come on to in a second.
Yeah.
So, what started you writing fiction?
That's a very good question. Like most people, I had tried to start a novel. I'd written the first couple of chapters of a novel, different novels, several times during my life. And it's an interesting thing. I think once you first write a book and finish it and have it published, even though it's a non-fiction book, it does give you that self-confidence, that self-realization that this is actually something you can do. But writing fiction is intensely more difficult, I find, than writing non-fiction, because you really are laying yourself open. You're opening yourself up. I mean, I've done a little bit of singing in the past, and it's a similar feeling, although singing is more intense, because you're really standing there and you're sort of opening yourself up and saying, well, this is what I have to offer. And of course, there's always the danger that people don't like what you have to offer. and a lot of writers, just like a lot of musicians, do have quite fragile egos.
Well, I think all creative people have somewhat fragile egos.
Yes.
Yeah, I think. So you wrote a few started chapters and then.
Yes, I mean, I think I always knew. I grew up with a couple of different fictional worlds that stayed with me, that I dipped into at a very early stage and read all the books and stayed with me. And they were really the world of Map and Lucia, particularly the world of Tilling, which of course is Rye in fairly thin disguise, and the world of Lord Peter Wimsey. And for some reason, those two worlds always appealed to me, particularly the world of Lord Peter Wimsey, actually. And it was always a sad disappointment to me as I grew up to the age of sort of 17 or 18 and discovered that ordinary people didn't have manservants and didn't have a Lagonda.
Yes, didn't have valets.
Or a flat in the Albany. It was a sad disillusionment.
And sad that you weren't going to get there either.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'd always imagined myself in a silk dressing gown.
That for me, it was that and realising that Jeeves was no longer around.
Yes.
You couldn't get to Jeeves anymore.
That's right.
I was very disappointed with
Yes,
that.
but for me, they were very real worlds.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I know we're going to talk about the book in a moment, but that is one of the issues, obviously, that comes through in the book.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting that we, fictional universes stick with us for long periods of time, and I think that's something that's universal and still true today.
Yeah.
You have big people sticking with fictional universes. You can see that in the modern context with things like Harry Potter and so on and so forth, that are so connected to people and go there, and I think that's very interesting, that how much that sticks with you as a young person and then keeps her going through time.
And so when I came to recreate the world of Tilling, the world of Map and Lucia, it seemed very natural somehow.
So how did you get to do that? Because
it was an adventure, because I broke sort of the cardinal rule which I've kept ever since, which is never to write a book that I don't already have at least strong interest in from a publisher. So I wrote Major Benji, which is the first Map and Lucia book, completely on spec.
Oh wow!
I have to say I always thought it would get published, and it was a great shock to me to discover how difficult it was. It was my first education, I think, in how modern publishers are looking to tick certain boxes. And if a book doesn't tick those boxes, they're not really quite sure how to deal with it. So, for example, I tried to get an agent to represent me when I was writing my Map and Lucia books, and all the agents universally said, these are hopelessly uncommercial, which is ironic when you consider that all three have now been optioned by BBC Television.
Yeah, there has been a BBC series recently, and it's that sort of books are universally appealing.
Yeah.
I think I always had this argument with some of my creative friends about novels and books, and why do they keep remaking stuff? Because they're universally appealing. We have a sense of a link to that story all the time. Why do they remake The Musketeers? Why do they remake?
I think there's a more cynical reason as well, though, which is that the television companies want something safe.
Yes.
And remaking something which hasn't. It's like you don't get fired for buying IBM.
Yes.
If you remake something which has a name, particularly if you can then add a couple of big name actors to it, it's a fairly safe commercial bet. Whereas branching out with something new is much more speculative and high risk, or at least as they see it.
So you wrote the book, and so how did you get published, and how did I'm assuming you had to go through the rights holders of Map and Lucia?
Yes, with the first one I wrote, Map and Lucia was still in E.F. Benson, the creator, was still in copyright in the UK. So I had to do a deal with the estate to get their permission. They had to obviously to review some of the text to see that it was suitable, that it wasn't going to in any way sort of infringe on the image of Map and Lucia and E.F. Benson. Then after I'd written it, I had to find a publisher, which was very difficult. I ended up finding someone who wanted to take a chance on it, was prepared to do a partnership publishing deal. And then I was very lucky. Almost immediately afterwards, I was asked to write a book on cricket, actually, by a different publisher. And it turned out that the editor I was given, a very nice lady called Olivia, knew very little, at least at that stage, about cricket, but was an avid Map and Lucia fan. So she promptly negotiated to buy the rights of the first book from the existing publisher and commissioned me to write two more. And I always sort of knew it was going to be a trilogy. I'd always planned to write the trilogy because, without giving anything away, for those who haven't read it, I always had the ending of the third book in mind when I was actually writing the first book. So I always knew where I was going, which is unusual for me when I write fiction. Normally I don't know where I'm going. Normally I just create the characters and I let them do their thing and I run along behind making notes.
And it's interesting you say that. We'll come on to that, the character creation thing in a second, because having written myself, I understand that process. So that was really good. Cricket, a passion of yours?
Yes, another passion of mine, Test cricket, and it was, again, I felt there was something new to be said. It was a very interesting period of English cricket. It's the period from 1967 to 1977, and for those who know their cricket, that embraces the Close affair, the D'Oliveira affair, and then ends with World Series cricket. So it was a decade of cricket controversy. Largely driven, it has to be said, by both class and racial prejudice, and it was a fascinating period to write about. I got an opportunity to interview a lot of my boyhood heroes.
How fun is that?
Amazing old test cricketers, many of whom sadly have passed away since then. And I also was very fortunate in that the MCC opened up their archives to me, and I was allowed to read anything I want in the MCC archives, and particularly with the Close affair, that was actually a very enlightening experience.
Oh, amazing. So will you write another cricket book in the future?
It's been suggested. I think I may not, simply if only because I'm not sure I'll have the time in my writing schedule to do it. But it has been suggested that there'd be a follow-up book called The Three Gs, which will be about Gooch, Gower and Gatty.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That's good. So apart from cricket, what other hobbies? What are you passionate about?
I've always been very passionate about classical music, particularly chamber music. It's interesting, I talk about cricket, but I used to spend a lot of time in the United States, particularly in San Francisco, and I also became very fond of American football, the NFL, which I think is a wonderful game.
Oh yes,
and
I.
I've kept up my interest in that.
Although
sadly the San Francisco 49ers are no longer the team they were when I used to spend large amounts of time in San Francisco.
So are you a 49ers?
In my heart, I'm still a 49ers fan, yes. I think at the moment my favourite team are probably the Carolina Panthers.
A good team, interesting team. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, long-time Steelers fan. Yes. I became a fan of theirs off just about the end of their golden years. So I started watching in the late 80s, early 80s. So that was kind of when the Pittsburgh Steelers had peaked.
Yes, well, I used to run something called Horsley Bridge International, which was a private equity fund of funds, and quite often at private equity conferences in California, there was a chap called Ronnie Lott, who was one of the safeties on the 49ers, who became a private equity fund manager after he retired. So that was always quite a thrill, meeting him at these conferences.
Oh, that's good. I like that. So yes, did you watch the Super Bowl this year?
I did watch the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, I watched it too. I knew, actually bizarrely, that the Panthers were not going to win.
Well, I knew what the Broncos were going to do, and I was staggered that the Panthers hadn't prepared for that and taken steps, because it was the only way they could possibly win the game. You didn't have to be a genius to work out what they were going to do.
No, absolutely.
And it was just very, very strange. I can only assume it was massive complacency because they'd had such a successful season and they thought that they could just handle anything that was thrown at them. To
a degree, but I also think that sometimes you just see the team on the field and you just kind of look at them and go, whatever sport it is, you just look at them and go, they're going to win.
Yes, or looking at the other team and you just think, this is a train wreck.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the leader of the team, and if it's, in the Broncos frame, it was Elway, leading out effectively, that kind of, the last hurrah, as it were.
It was just sad that it wasn't a better game, and in fact the Super Bowl often is not a very good game, of course.
No, it's very,
although the one the year before was one of the best.
Yeah, it's very rarely a good game. Yeah, no, but of course the 49ers had the legendary Joe Montana.
That's right.
Which was superb.
Well, they had Joe Montana and Steve Young on the same roster at the same time. I mean, that couldn't happen today with the salary cap and everything, but to have two of the greatest quarterbacks ever on the roster at the same time.
And then Jerry Rice as well.
Jerry Rice.
No, it's just an amazing period of American football history.
Yes.
So we're off track on that. That's amazing.
But I digress.
Very digress. Very digress. So, your latest book is out now.
Yes.
Death in Profile, which we have here.
Death in Profile.
We shall show the readers, show the listeners, so how did that come about?
I'd always wanted to write some detective fiction. I was always in search of a theme, an idea, and gradually various ideas coalesced. The first is I've always been a tremendous fan of Hampstead. I think it's one of the most picturesque and magical areas, certainly of London.
Yes, definitely.
And certainly, and where I would live if I could afford it. So there's also a certain degree of wish fulfillment in setting my fictional universe in Hampstead, because it's where I'd like to live myself. And the other thing that came to me was being a great reader, reading a huge number of books. I was just getting very fed up with the number of times I would pick up a modern detective story and lay it aside after a chapter, thinking I really just don't want to read this. I don't really care about what happens to these characters. I don't think it's particularly well written. So I wanted to produce something that was well written, and for me that means really harking back to the golden age of detective writing between the wars. So, not really for me to say, but I would say that the style of the book is probably fairly closely similar to somebody like Ngaio Marsh or Marjorie Allingham or somebody like that. I wanted to create a team of detectives rather than one central figure. I wanted them to be human beings who made mistakes, so without giving too much away, they do make mistakes in the book. And I wanted them to be ordinary, rounded, likeable human beings, so that the reader actually cares about what happens to them. It's particularly important as it's the first in a series, so you will follow their fortunes as the characters develop in later books. I just didn't want to create another noir detective book with a damaged central character, with a drink problem or a gambling problem or a drugs problem or whatever it might be. I wanted ordinary. There are some damaged individuals in the book, but certainly not in the same extreme way that they get presented in a lot of other modern books.
Yes, I think that's very true. We've sort of gone down that track. I mean,
Yes.
I'm a big fan. I'm a huge fan of detective fiction, and for me, it's that I like that original noir period, but the American hard-boiled detective
Yes.
fiction, the Raymond Chandlers,
Yes.
the Dashiell Hammetts, that kind of period of time for me was always my favourite period of detective fiction, and the late Robert B. Parker as well.
Yeah, I can remember you recommending Robert B. Parker too.
Yeah, so that was kind of that again, but and it's interesting, isn't it, that detective fiction really is. I always find it's about the detective or detectives,
Yes.
not really about the case. Effectively, the case is a vehicle for
Yes.
the characters to
I think
express
that's right.
themselves.
And I think where that starts to go wrong, or where that can present problems, is where you have detectives or characters who don't really develop from book to book.
Yes.
I can remember watching Monty or listening to Test Match Special, and somebody was describing Monty Panesar, and they said the problem with Monty Panesar is he's played 30 Test matches once.
yes.
It's a bit like you read a Poirot book, for example. Poirot is the same in each book. There's no progression.
Yes.
You get it obviously with Peter Wimsey and Harriet Vane in the Dorothy L. Sayers books, certainly those in which they feature together. You get a developing story.
Yeah.
But
No, I think, as you say, the characters need to develop as much as
Yes.
as much as the essentially for a serial.
And so what will happen in the Hampstead murders, for example, is it's not just you see them developing going forward into the future, you also find out things about their past, which helps fill in the backstory and helps you understand them as characters.
Yeah, and we're going to review it in the magazine and on the podcast and all that sort of stuff. So I won't spoil the plot or any of the things that are going on, but it's so far I'm about halfway through, and it's very interesting, and I'm intrigued by the characters myself. So I like that, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And you're saying that the next one will change
Yes, each, for example, there's something in particular you find out about the past of one of the characters that makes you understand much more why they behave as they do. And then, of course, again, it's not really giving too much away, there's an ongoing love triangle within the team of detectives, and you also get to see the next round of that, as it were, play itself out.
Yes, right. I think, well, of course, it's that great thing. Office romances
Yes.
are frequent in the world, especially in high intense worlds like police.
Yes.
Being a fan of, did you know you were going to write modern detective fiction? Because I know you're Lord Peter Wimsey and that kind of thing.
I do enjoy writing period fiction, and I think I'm particularly drawn to the period between the wars, probably just because that's where so much of my early reading was set. But to write this sort of book, particularly using female characters, I mean, even in the 1960s and 70s, female police officers were not allowed to take part in investigations.
Yes.
So once I decided that I wanted a strong central female character, the epoch really chose itself. It had to be modern.
Okay, excellent. Are you going to go write? Excuse me. Are you going to write a sort of between the wars piece?
It's strange you should say that. I do have a couple of other possible series on the go. One of which uses the idea of real-life Golden Age writers like Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers investigating crimes as detectives.
Oh, nice.
Which was always one of the stated aims of the detection club which they formed, something they never really got round to doing, perhaps happily, because they might not have been terribly good at investigating real-life crimes. And the other one which I've got on the go is set in the Second World War. It has an RAF background, and it features almost a Ripley-type character. It's a little bit of a Patricia Highsmith type book of a rather psychopathic character who carves a grim passage through other people's lives.
Oh, I look forward to reading those. I love the period between the wars. I read a fantastic non-fiction, a historical book called The Long Weekend.
Yeah.
About the period between the First and Second World Wars, and so. Amazing stories and amazing tales.
And it is a different world. I mean, it is amazing how much Britain has changed since the 1930s.
And excuse me, how much the world has changed.
Yes.
Because, you could do great adventures in that period of time, and the world had not been explored. And
that's right.
You could do fantastic things, and it was at that period of time ladies were starting to take control of their lives. And
yes, and also, the idea of the gentleman detective, I think, was still very credible in the 1930s. Right? I think if you tried to write there's a little bit of a gentleman detective in Death in Profile, but if you tried to write the idea of a gentleman detective today, I think you'd be laughed out of court. I don't think anyone would take it very seriously.
Yes, it would have to be a very fictional universe. So, what's next? What's next for Guy? What are you up to next? What's the next thing for?
I'm intending to write, hopefully, the first 5 or 6 of the Hampstead Murders fairly quickly. Ideally at roughly 6-month intervals, something like that. I'm very fortunate in the way I write. I mean, speaking to other writers at conferences and festivals, a lot of them rewrite their novels sometimes 3 or 4 times. I don't actually have to do that. I find that my first draft is usually more or less complete, and it can go to the printers more or less as it stands. So I do write fairly quickly. So the challenge really is not so much writing the books, but planning them. It's coming up with the ideas and the plots, or for me, more importantly, the solutions. Because as I said, I don't really know how a book's going to end when I start it. And I've already discovered that with detective fiction, that's not actually a terribly good idea. Because you get to a certain moment halfway through the book and you have no idea how it's going to end, and you have to go and shut yourself away and drink very strong gin and tonic for a few days while you while you wrestle desperately with the various plot issues.
What is your writing habit? Because all writers have habits.
I prefer to write in the morning simply because I'm an early person rather than a late person, and I tend to write for a fairly concentrated burst of about 2 hours. My target, like most writers, is to produce about 1,500 words a day. Fiction. Non-fiction I can write more. Non-fiction I can do 2,500 or 3,000 words. But fiction is difficult. It's strange to explain, but you get to it after 1,500 words, you just feel played out. It's very difficult then to go on with the same quality.
And do you have a plotted board out?
No, again, I should. I'm sure if I'd ever gone on a creative writing course, I would have been taught to plot my novels out on a sort of operations plan, as you suggest, and then I wouldn't have these awful problems that arise with the plot. But that's just not the way it works for me. I have to, as I say, create the characters and let them go their own way and sort of just run along and tidy up behind them.
Do the characters sit with you still? Do you sort of think, Collins would do that?
Yes, very much so. Very much so, yes. And so in a sense that makes it that much easier to write. But yes, you do reach a certain level of obsession with your characters. I mean, even though I haven't written any Map and Lucia now for about 3 years, I still find myself imagining what they might do in different situations as I'm sitting in an airport departure lounge or something.
And so I wouldn't ask you to name the character, but do you associate with one of the characters more strongly than anyone else?
I think your characters are always a composite. There's one character which is based almost entirely on a real person. There's one character who is just Bob Metcalf, who I think is just the composite all-round good bloke, the sort of bloke you'd be happy to have a beer with in the pub or chat about football to, or whatever it might be. Of the other 2 characters, I think one of them is probably a combination of Rory Aline, who is Niall Marsh's detective, and perhaps a little bit of Dalgleish, and a little bit of me. And the other one I think is a combination of partly somebody I used to know, again, partly a little bit of me, probably the more eccentric parts of me, and perhaps a little bit Lord Peter Wimsey.
Just a
dash.
Just a dash of
an
it.
intriguing cocktail of character.
I know which character you're referring to, and I think you're right. So, thank you very much. So we round off every Perfect Gentleman interview with our 10 gentlemanly questions.
Far away.
Are you ready for them?
Yeah.
So we don't advance give you these, so we want your honest answers.
This is completely spontaneous, viewers.
So, first question. So, what makes or embodies a gentleman for you?
I think it's somebody who has sensitivity for other people, and it doesn't really matter who they are. I remember there's a passage in Proust where he describes this central character, the narrator, going to the opera, and the aristocrats and the wealthy people are up in the boxes, and the nouveau riche are being extremely rude to the attendants at the opera, whereas the old money is sort of chatting to them as if they were old family friends. And I think Swan actually says to himself that he suddenly realized what makes the difference between being a true gentleman and not being a gentleman. And I would echo that. I think it's somebody who is sensitive to the needs and the potential hurt of other people.
I like that very much. So what's the most romantic thing you've ever done?
Oh my word. The most romantic thing I've ever done was probably actually to go with my wife to the Venice Carnival one year. We went in costume to various events, and it's a very long story, but I ended up being crowned king of the carnival at the closing event. And in order to become king of the carnival, you had to choose 2 ladies at random whom you did not know, and compose love poems to each of them. And then the lady who got the most poems, received the most poems, got to choose the winner. And she chose me, and I used to go to Italy quite a lot on business at the time, and my Italian friends were very excited when I turned up in the Italian newspapers as an Englishman as the king of the Venetian Carnival. So that's probably, I think, the most romantic thing I've ever done.
And a great tale too.
And a great story.
King of the Venetian Carnival. I love that. So if you could bring one gentlemanly trait into business, what would it be?
I think, sadly, it used to be part of business, but no longer is. My word is my bond. I think if you give someone your word, then you should stick to it, no matter how difficult it becomes.
The handshake agreement.
Yeah, I think that's what determines your character.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So what element of grooming is most important to you?
I'm fanatical about a good shave.
Oh, excellent.
Absolutely fanatical about
a
good
routine?
I have a regime, way beyond a routine. I have a regime of all sorts of different toiletries, sort of cleansers and gels and moisture. I have at least 3 different moisturizers, for example, which I use on different occasions and
excellent.
different situations.
Do you have a preferred razor or product?
Are we allowed to name brands?
Yes,
I'm very much. I've tried just about every brand on the market over the years, and I've settled very much on the L'Oreal Men Expert range, which I find works very well for me. So
good, excellent.
I like the charcoal face scrub before I shave, and then the shaving gel, and then they do 3 very different moisturizers.
Excellent. And do you?
And I shave usually 3 times. I normally shave down and then up, and then I sort of go over those awkward little bits. But I am. When I say I'm fanatical about a good shave, I am totally fanatical about a good shave.
I admire you, and wonderful because as we talked, 90% of men are never taught to shave, and 70%.
Well, I wasn't.
Of men,
I mean, but I sort of worked it out for myself.
But 70% of women still shave badly every day.
Yes, I think it's a tragedy that you're not taught to shave.
Oh, it's back to the life skills.
Yes.
And what's the razor you use? Just out of interest to you.
I just use an ordinary blade. I use the Gillette Mach 3 Turbo, which I find works best for me. Again, I've tried them all, but I've just settled on what seems to work best for me.
Yeah, it is. As we always say, it's up to the individual.
Yes.
You've got to find what works well for you. I'm like you. I'm a fanatical. Once, I'll take a day off, not shaving because I need to rest the skin. But if I'm shaving, I have my 10 minutes.
I have to shave every day. I can't. I mean, I know there are some people who won't shave at the weekends. The only concession I make is if I'm on holiday, then I tend to shave in the evening rather than the morning.
Which I tend to do as well.
I still shave every day.
I don't shave every day, but I shave most days. I find that if I shave every single day, I tend to get rash and stuff like that.
Oh.
So that's personal. But anyway, so name one iconic gentleman for you.
A fictional gentleman would have to be Lord Peter Wimsey.
Obviously.
Real life gentleman.
Alive or dead, it makes no difference.
Ronald Colman, maybe?
Okay, very good. What's the most important item in your wardrobe?
I have a black canary jacket which I love because it's incredibly versatile. You can wear it. It's so many. You can wear it with a sweater in the winter, or you can wear it with a t-shirt or an open shirt in the summer. But I'm a great tie fanatic. I mean, I really go against the tie idea. I know ties are going out of fashion, but I've probably got close to 100 ties. I used to go to Milan on business a lot, and I always used to come back with at least one new tie.
Excellent. And as you know, I'm a tie man, so I'm a big tie man. And it's weirdly, it's coming in and out of. It's not out of fashion, and
Yes.
I think people are starting to realise that tie is a good expression of.
I'm also a big supporter of cravats. Which...
You're preaching to the converted. We like that. So why should there be more gentlemen in the world?
I think the world needs to be a more gentlemanly place. I think we've lost a lot of the elegance and, more importantly, the courtesy of the world.
Yes.
And I think that's very sad. Everything's come to be instant, and everything's come to be about money. And I really don't think it should be. I think that it should be about deeper things, and it should be about being pleasant to other people.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. What key skill should every young gentleman be taught?
Apart from shaving.
Apart from shaving.
I think how to behave towards a lady. Again, this is very much going out of fashion, but opening doors, helping with coats, walking on the outside, all that sort of good stuff.
The great modern chivalry code.
Yes, indeed.
The courtly love.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I like that. What should a gentleman never be without?
A handkerchief, perhaps. Has so many uses. After all, when a lady bursts into tears, you always have a clean handkerchief.
You're a man after my own heart, Guy. And then the last question, it's actually more of a statement. So please, would you finish the sentence? Mm-hmm. A gentleman should always
be sensitive to the needs of others.
Wonderful. Guy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
A pleasure, and look forward to finishing the book and reviewing it, and looking forward to the next one.
Well, I hope you enjoy it.